So we're going to start off, first start off tying two of my favorite streamer patterns. One is going to be called the sparkle minnow, and the first one we're going to tie is called a Michigan fry. And I think within the last couple of years, streamer patterns in particular have been almost like a male anatomy measuring contest. Everyone's trying to go as big and large as possible. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're going to start off just utilizing a 45-degree bend jig hook in a size 10 with a slotted tungsten bead. The cool thing about these flies, this is a pattern that I came across when I was doing a competition in Michigan on the Muskegon River. On the Muskegon River, they have a bunch of salmon fry that they basically stock. They go back into the lake and then come back as adult salmon. But in the spring, when they stock these par, you see fish rising in the Muskegon, just fish rising left and right, and you're thinking they're eating dry flies, where in fact they're actually picking off these fry, small little salmon fry higher in the water column. This pattern, like all patterns I like to fish, are fairly simple. This body is really two parts. It's going to be a chickaboo, or what they call a grizzly marabou. That's a natural marabou material right here. So if you look at it, it has kind of like an olive yellow tint to it. We're going to use one fiber for the tail. We're going to use gold ice dub for the body, and then we're going to use this material again to create a collar. And when we're done with it, you're going to see it has a really nice parry motion. So this is a great pattern imitation for any like bait fish pattern that you're trying to imitate, but also if you're fishing a lake that has like perch, baby perch, this also is a fantastic perch imitation as well. And like all good things in life, it's very difficult to come across good packs of marabou. So we're going to pick off a plume right here. This is going to be our tail, and what we're trying to do with the profile, when I tie this in, this is a kind of a wide base feather, it's a piece of marabou, but when I tie this in, I want to tie this in staying straight up. I don't want to tie it in off to the side where it's flat, I want it right up down, so when we're retrieving this fly, you have a wider profile. So we just have a size 10 hook with a 1/8 inch tungsten bead. We're going to wrap our thread back. If the hook did have a barb, it would be wrapped right to the point where the barb would be standing. And with this marabou, what we're going to do is we're going to go in about 1.5 to 2 times length of the hook shank. We're going to tie this in. And we're going to make one loose wrap, just kind of pinch that slightly. But I just want to make sure when I pinch, I'm holding on to my fibers so they're staying straight up. I'm going to make another wrap, a little tighter, and then tightest. And then that should keep that fiber standing straight up. Cut this off here. Good. Now we're going to go in there and just kind of wrap over and secure that fiber. And the one thing I want to mention, when you're tying with marabou, it's important. Every time you're wrapping and twisting, if you're trying to get the material to stand straight up, if I keep this marabou pinched the entire time, when I'm wrapping, you'll see once in a while, I'm actually going to twist. And when I let go, you're going to see that marabou on flare, on twist. When I'm wrapping, I'm going to make 1 or 2 wraps, let go. Make 1 or 2 wraps, let go. That's going to keep it staying in plane. Okay. Now for the body, our collar is going to be folded over top, and what we're going to want is some sort of reflective property, gold material. I'm going to use this gold ice dub. And because this is a synthetic, mostly all synthetic fibers, it doesn't always adhere well without some sort of dubbing wax. So we're going to use some dubbing wax. Looks like a piece of bubble gum that you chewed way too long. Okay. Tap this on here. And we don't always want to wrap super tight. We'll get some of this material laying on there, but we don't want it super tight because I actually want some of these fibers standing up. And we can actually comb these out with a piece of Velcro if you want to later on. There we go. Now,
Dave Gibson to the Adventure Theater.
I'll wrap forward, all the way up, right up to the bead. Just make sure it's a nice kind of even, slightly tapered. And what we're going to do is we're going to have 1 wrap left. We're just going to pull that fibers back, and we're going to give ourselves some room to tie in our collar. It's like my kids' arts and crafts day. Okay, we're gonna tie this in. Now, for the collar, what we want is a really wide base fiber, because this is actually gonna be tied in 2 or 3 times wraps, and then we're gonna fold this over top. So, there we go, kind of a nice wide base fiber. And we're gonna tie this in, tip first. Like I said, this is a great, anything, brown, brook trout, par. If you have little perch, blue, this is just a great bluegill imitation as well, baby bluegill, perch pattern.
Do you vary the color?
Absolutely, you can definitely vary the color if you want.
So that would do, if that imitates a baby perch, that would do good with Vermont.
Absolutely,
Use that.
yeah. Yes, sir, Craig.
So, when you're fishing this pattern, you're fishing mainly in still water?
I'm fishing both in still water and on rivers, and then
Strip it?
normally what I'm doing, I'm actually swinging them. And most of the time, as you know, like par, and like any type of like par, they're not always engaged in the actual moving body of water. So normally they're in like the slack water, the slower moving pools. So I'm often casting down across and just with a floating line, longer leader, and just kind of keeping that fly near the surface, because those fry, as you know, kind of stay suspended in the water column. And just kind of swinging them and just holding them basically downstream and just almost like a slow hand and twist retrieve back to you. And especially any place where you have like freshly hatched par, it's probably one of my favorite approaches and probably one of my favorite patterns. We're just gonna wrap this. We're gonna make probably 2 full wraps. 1 wrap next to the other. Kind of fold this back. We're gonna just zigzag. Once we're done with the wrap, just kind of zigzag so we're not pulling those fibers down. 1 or 2 wraps, secure that. Wrap in front. Stem. Plug out those fibers here. But you can see now with that chickaboo over top, it's thin, wispy, and what we can do now is just to kind of, if you want to do a dub collar, we can do that. Put a few more strands of ice dub up in the front, give ourselves a nice collar, almost a modified hot spot. Here. And when this thing gets wet, when you fold it back, you're going to see that really nice parring. The exact same type of parring you'll see on any young of the year or baby brook or brown trout. Forgot my whip finish at home, we'll just do it the old school style. Hit it. Down. Down. Right there. Again, if you want to look at just a really nice par pattern, I've come across a handful, but this is by far one of my favorites. And it's just something that a couple guides in Michigan shared with me, but I just call it the Michigan Fry. Let's do another streamer. This streamer is called the Coffee Sparkle Minnow. This was introduced to me a handful of years ago on the Yellowstone River, and has quickly become one of my favorite all-around go-to bait fish imitations. So what we're going to just do is just use a partridge attitude hook. I think this is like a size 2. 2x long shank. We're going to use a black tungsten bead. And what we're going to do as well, we're going to put a few lead wraps right in there to kind of add some weight to the fly, but then also help lock in that tungsten cone right behind the eye. But 10 wraps, snug it in there, and lock it in. This fly has got contrast, and I think all the great patterns I fish, whether they're nymphs or dries, or even streamers, have points of contrast. Because if you look at like baitfish, for example, often they have like a lighter bottom and a darker top. So this pattern is going to be no different. So what we're going to do with this body, and with the tail first, it's going to be a 2-tone tail. And most of my streamers, I like fishing 2-tone tails. Right. So 2-tone tail. So this tail is going to be about 2 times the length of the hook shank. Right about there. So the reason why we're doing about 2 times the length of the hook shank is our body is going to be gold sparkle brush, longer fibers. And if we make the tail too short when we fold the fibers over, essentially the fibers of this body are going to cover the tail. So in order for the tail to actually protrude out and actually have movement, we need this tail to be about 2 times the length of the hook shank. And now we're going to tie in our light olive on top. Now just watch this when we're tying in this marabou. If I keep this marabou pinched the entire time, I'm just wrapping. Now watch how this marabou is going to unfold and twist. You see how that just twists, it's turning. So when I'm wrapping, every time, I'm going to wrap straight down, wrap, release. I'm just releasing that tension, and as a result, when you are finished through, your marabou is not going to be twisted. It's going to be laying pretty much flush and then playing the way you want it to. Okay. It's the thread tension, and then also as I'm wrapping, I'm off. Sometimes when I'm applying I'm applying pressure off to the side, which is hand and turning it. So if you could, there's always a way you could counter it. You could just make kind of a loose wrap and then pull straight down or straight up. But when I make those quick movements straight down, I have a tendency of breaking my thread. So constant tension, and then just kind of relax the marabou as you're wrapping. Basically, it's a compensation for maybe poor technique, whatever it is. Now, to maintain this bottom theme, this 2-tone theme, our body is going to be constructed of a white underbelly, this Enrico Puglisi streamer brush, white, and then we're going to have a gold brush for most of the body. Now I like this material. If you're crafting, you can create your own dubbing, dubbing wires, that's perfectly fine. This is a great material, I love it. Unfortunately, if you were to weigh this with real gold, the price is pretty much the same because it's pretty expensive stuff. But you don't lose too many streamers. So what we're going to do for our underbelly, we're going to tie this wire in underneath. We're just going to wrap essentially right up to the tail. And we're going to keep that tucked underneath. Now, for our body that we're actually going to palmer, we're going to palmer the body with a gold sparkle brush, and then we're going to pull the white brush underneath to give us our underbelly. We're going to tie the brush in here, just tip of the wire, and essentially you want a full fly. The fuller the fly, the more movement the fly is going to have, the more kick it's going to have in the presentation. So we're going to basically use 1 brush per fly. We're going to tie this in with a wire and wrap back right to where the materials actually begin. Okay, good. Now to help create more of a body, create more substance to help allow the fly to kick and move, for our underbelly we're going to take rayon chenille. And this is a step you don't need to, but this is going to help kind of create a fuller body, give the fly a little bit more movement, more kick when you're retrieving a fly. But then also when you're making wraps, when you're palmering the streamer brush, it's a wire brush. Trying to wrap this on bare hook, you're going to find it has a tendency of sliding. So the rayon chenille is going to give us a little more bulk, but then also it's going to help give us some fibers to tie in. It's like when you're wrapping hackle around the hook shank, doing a little dub underneath the hook shank, on top of the hook shank when you're wrapping the hackle. It's going to help bind this fibers to stick into. So all we're going to do here is just with a white rayon chenille, tie this in, wrap forward. Now, we're going to just palmer the body here, 1 wrap in front of the next. Tighten up on this. Okay, wrap. Wrap up a little more. Okay, wrap. Again, this fly comes in a range of color schemes, but back home we have a lot of like long nose dace, black nose dace, which is a very common minnow pattern. And this color scheme tends to work really well. I've used this pattern for steelhead fishing, lots of blues and whites. For bass, if you like bass fishing, lots of chartreuse and whites have worked very well for me. So wrap that chenille up. Now, what we're going to do with our sparkle brush, so I'm going to wrap, I'm going to hold this under tension, and I'm going to fold these fibers. So all the fibers are now going to be standing on one side. We're going to start wrapping. We're going to palmer this. 1 wrap right next to the other. Folding those fibers back, just orienting the streamer brush so it's not twisting, it's not canting. Pull back. Just takes a little bit of time. But if you're doing this right, you should almost use one brush per fly. You can skimp on it, but you will definitely sacrifice movement. And again, when you're fishing with 8 to 15 pound test tippet, you don't lose too many of these in the course of a year, or you shouldn't. Just fluff that up. You're gonna wrap all the way up.
Classroom A, we have a free Stillwater clinic with Mike Andreessen, Dave Schultz, and Buddy Knight. 15 minutes, free.
Now, how many streamer anglers do we have here? A couple? All right, good. And how many nymph anglers do we have? All right, we'll tie at least one or two here in just a moment. I'll palm this all the way up. This is actually my kid's favorite pattern to tie. Now, right at the very end, when you're running close, just make sure you kind of fold those fibers out. Good. Now we just keep wrapping. Here, looks like an angry porcupine at this moment. Keep folding. Okay. Yep. Almost one streamer brush. Complete. Good. Choke up in the thread. Zigzags. You don't take too many of those fibers down. Snug. Clean that up. Good. Secure that in there. Now, for our underbelly, what we're going to do, we're going to just kind of clear a path. Just kind of fold these fibers off to the side. And what I'm going to do now is just slowly pull this white streamer brush underneath. And I'm going to orient all these fibers so they're standing straight down. And I'm going to find my tie-off point. I'm going to create a beard essentially with this. I'm going to take these fibers and just kind of fold them back. Pull them right back, right there, and pinch. And with this wrap, I'm going to just make one or two loose wraps, and then you can pull straight down or straight up, and that's going to cinch that white marabou right underneath.
Don't forget to come up front and visit the drawings, the auction up front.
I'm just going to lock that in. And two, if you really want to, some people will do this.
The red ticket auction will close in about an hour. We've got some great stuff up here, so don't forget to come up and take a look.
Our black nose days have a darker top, so you can always take a black permanent marker and just kind of coat the top with a black marker to kind of give it almost a three-tone effect. But right there is probably one of my favorite patterns. It's just the coffee sparkle minnow. Let's do some nymphs. So what we're gonna do here is
Still haven't hit that one.
absolutely. If you, in my book, I did a book on streamer fishing a couple years ago. All the steelhead were caught on variations of that fly. It's just a great pattern. You know, what I found is I just have developed a couple confidence patterns. That is being one of my confidence patterns for bait fish. And I just tie that in a variety of colors. Okay. So what we're going to do a variation of the Prince nymph, which is called the Jiggy Prince. But instead of using traditional biots, the brown, the dark brown, and like a white biot for the tail and also for the wing, what we're going to be doing is substituting the biot, but we're going to be using Spanflex, white Spanflex. Just going to do a size 14 to give you a little larger item to look at during the program. Okay. Slotted bead. Everyone has used slotted beads and jig hooks before, correct? You understand the concept of the slide bead, so it slides over the 90-degree bend. Okay. Just going to use some black thread for this. You know, there really isn't anything too new and exciting in fly fishing, just different people's variations. And I tell you, this is just one of those patterns. The Prince nymph is always a staple in my box. I'm always trying to do a few variations, just trying to give the fish something a little different to look at. And the substitution of the rubber legs I find to be a little helpful. So, okay. Lock that in. Good. Now, first things first. For the legs and for the tail, instead of using the dark brown biots, we're just going to use a brown Spanflex material. And the one thing I will note of caution with the Spanflex, I don't do a lot of bulk with these flies. Like if I'm going to tie flies with the Spanflex, I tend to tie enough just for the next couple weeks or a season. Even if you leave them in your box over, in a room-conditioned room with no sunlight, Spanflex just has a tendency, it seems to me, has a much shorter shelf life. So we're just going to double that over, and we're just going to fold these back. And when I'm wrapping the Spanflex, this is why I'm using a larger diameter, like a 140. It's just light tension all the way down. If I pull down too deep, too fast, I'm going to basically cut through that wire, or two, I'm going to create a hinge point, and I'm going to kick those legs up. So just nice, smooth, gentle wraps all the way back down to almost the hook point. And we're going to cut this off. And what you'll find is if you have really dark, dirty water, leave the legs a little bit longer. If you want to decide to shorten them up, you can do that, but it's always easier, as you know, to shorten the legs up than rather to add legs on after the fact. For the rib, we're just going to do a traditional rib. We're just going to use some copper wire. And we're going to use peacock roll for the old body. I know there's a lot of substitutions, iStub, and there's a lot of these dubbing manufacturers that have a peacock color, but I have experimented with them, and by my experience, there's still something about natural peacock. You just can't substitute natural peacock. So I still like the natural stuff. Okay, so for this size fly, we're just going to use about 4 fibers, and as you know with peacock will have a taper. So we're going to tie this in tip first, away from the bunt stem. Kind of just trim the top here, and we're going to tie this in. Right on top of the hook shank.
Cleat Grover, please come to the back tables.
Okay, tie that down, and what we're going to do now is just wrap our peacock curl. And what we're going to do, to try to reinforce the body as best as we can, we're going to try to crisscross, zigzag. So when I wrap my peacock curl, I'm going to wrap the peacock curl around the body in one direction, and then when I wrap my rib, I'm going to wrap in the opposite direction. So one, I'm going to create an X. This is going to do a couple things. One, it's going to allow you the wire to actually stand out against the grain of the fibers that you're wrapping, the peacock curl, but then two, hopefully it's going to help reinforce the fibers, create a more durable fly. So when I'm wrapping this peacock curl, I'm just going to wrap almost at a 45-degree bend towards the tail. I'm just wrapping at an angle, almost all the way to the bead. Tie that off, lock it in, secure it. Now what I'm going to do, and I'll do a half hitch here because normally I don't, but I guarantee you if I'm doing a show and I don't do a half hitch, the fly's going to come undone. It happens every time. So now with the medium wire, we're going to wrap at 45, just at an angle, but in a different direction. Again, you can see the wire now standing out, but then two, hopefully it's going to reinforce that peacock curl, which is known to be brittle, right here, all the way up to the bead. Tie down and finish. Okay. Now for the wing case, now remember this is the jig hook, so this hook is actually going to be inverted. It's going to turn upside down. Anyway, now with the pheasant, with the Prince nymph, the way everyone ties the legs on is almost straight on top. Because the fly will rotate and twist and turn during the presentation, I actually prefer to tie the legs in, whether it's the biots or the legs, directly off to the side. So it doesn't matter what orientation, the fish are going to be able to see it, whether it turns upside down or not. So when I tie these legs in, all I'm going to do is just tie the white legs, which is replacing the white biots, just off to the side. Again, a couple loose wraps and a little tighter. Trim that off. Okay, lock that in. This is Spanflex. And this fiber just kind of split on me. That's the one problem with this. These fibers do have a tendency of splitting on you. Roll this up a little bit. We'll do this one more time. Little cut. Soft pinch, loose wraps, tie down. And off to the side. Again, we'll start a little bit longer, going just slightly beyond the bend of the hook. Now we're going to go off closest to me, do a pinch technique, fold that leg, again, right off to the side. A couple loose wraps, tighter, tighter, tightest. Pinch off. Now for the collar, you can use hen hackle, partridge. as most people will do for the kind of the collar. But what I'm going to do for the collar is just replace that with Saman peacock dubbing. Has anyone ever tied with this stuff before? The Saman peacock dubbing? If you like tying collars, this fiber is really short and stiff. Anytime you want to basically tie a collar on a nymph. So what we're going to do, anytime you want to tie a collar,
100 aisle.
anytime you want to tie a collar, the Saman peacock dubbing, you're more than welcome to come up later on. This is some of the best material out there for this. And we're just going to use this collar. It's just a bronze color. So what we're going to do now, we're going to create a dubbing loop. Some black thread. And dubbing wax is almost mandatory with this. And you'll find when you pull out these fibers, you'll see that the majority of them, there's going to be one orientation. You're going to see a lot of these fibers kind of sticking in a different, so you can actually take your hands and just kind of play with it. So most of these fibers, when you line it in, you want the long fibers going perpendicular. This is the thread, you want the fibers going perpendicular, just like a hackle stem. We're going to lay that right on in there. And once you lay it in there, you can kind of just manipulate and play with that for a moment. And what I'm going to do now is just take my trusty dubbing loop twister, kind of pinch that. And at this point right now, if you want to do anything, you want to kind of just play around with the fibers, making sure they're even on either side, you can do that. And you can see you have your loop. Now what we're going to do is just twist. Hold on here. There we go. Just twist. There we go. And you can see now that these fibers, when you do that dubbing twist, you see how that spiky that is? Just a fantastic material for doing a dubbing loop collar. And we're going to make one, maybe two full wraps. Let's do two full wraps right here, right up to the top. Now lock that in. Secure that. Cut. Fold those fibers back just a bit. Lock in the thread. Good. Now we'll do our half hitch. All right. If you had a piece of dubbing, Velcro, teaser, you can use that at this point as well. Just kind of trim those legs up just a bit. But right here is just, again, one of my favorite variations of a Prince nymph, just a Jiggy Prince. All right, so this last pattern, there's a guy named Martin Dros, who was was a former member of the Czech team. He might be competing again, I don't know. But one of the common themes you'll find with good anglers in general, or even comp anglers, they have confidence patterns. And this pattern is one of Martin's favorite patterns. And it's a very simple pattern. Again, the common theme with good comp flies, they are simple to tie, yet very effective. And that should be the theme of any pattern that we use. 4 parts. The tail is going to be a Coq de Leon tail. This is, I just call it the Czech holographic nymph. Okay. So we're just going to go back utilizing a 90-degree or 45-degree Czech hook, jig hook. Now for the tail, it's just going to be a holographic, not holographic, it's just going to use this is just a dark Pardo. Coq de Leon, or what they refer to it now, I guess, as CDL. Has anyone not tied with Coq de Leon before? Okay, perfect, everyone has. Just a great tailing material. I use this on all my nymphs, all my dry flies. It's got great durability, a nice barring movement. Okay, we're going to tie that tail in, about the same length as the hook shank. Now, for the tail, or for the body, it's going to be 2 parts. The first part is going to be red holographic. We're going to have a red hot spot. So all this is just a medium red holographic tinsel. We're just going to tie this in right in the back side. Wrap back towards the tail. Wrap your thread forward. Then we're going to wrap back. We're going to probably make three rotations. There's 2. Now we're going to make 1 rotation back forward. Okay. Create a nice red hump there. That's going to be our red hot spot. Fold that back, secure. Now the rest of the body, You can use black. There's so many color combinations, but what I'm using often right now, my favorite color combination is this red holographic butt and a brown holographic body. So now we're going to take the medium, same diameter, medium brown holographic tinsel, tie that in right behind the bead. Start wrapping back, and we're going to wrap back maybe about, to the point where we have maybe 3 eye lengths of red tinsel showing. Secure that, wrap forward. Now with our brown holographic tinsel, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to keep wrapping until we create a taper. So we might wrap back first, and then wrap forward again, but create an even taper. Forward. Now there's a little bump right there, so we just have to make a few wraps, kind of build that up, and proceed to wrap forward. Okay. Good. Secure the tinsel. Do a half hitch just for security measures. Like I said, I told you it's going to be a simple fly. Now for the body, for the collar, we're going to go back to this bronze peacock dubbing. We're going to take a nice small little pinch of this dubbing. You don't want too much. If it's too thick, it's going to be just too bulky, and it's not going to. Okay, now we're going to create our dubbing loop. Here. Again, I like the high tack. Whenever I'm doing any sort of dubbing loops, I really like this high tack. Take our pinch. Most of the fibers, again, we're going to line up so they're perpendicular to the thread. Right there. Get my dubbing loop twister here. Once I pinch, I can always kind of pull those fibers back. We're just going to spin until those fibers are wound tight, sticking out, again, like an angry porcupine. We're going to make almost 2 full wraps. 1 wrap, now make 2 wraps. Boom. We're going to lock this in right behind silver bead. What's great about these dubbing, I mean, you can use any of this Yan Saman material, but if you want to, you can do the same thing. You can substitute CDC. If you want to create a dub collar with CDC, you can do the same thing and give you a little more flotation, maybe, give you a few more bubbles in the presentation. But there's so many options. But these collared flies, I prefer doing collar flies rather than legs. So I just think it just gives the fly a little bit more movement. When you tie in usually a pair of legs, they have a tendency of falling back or folding back. Where here you actually get, I think, a lot more movement, a lot more bang for your buck. And right there is just a holographic Czech nymph. Again, just a simple pattern, but one of my favorites. You can do all kinds of color combinations. You can do an orange butt, but for me, I like that red and the brown. Probably just 2 of my favorite. And that might catch a fish from time to time, all right? That's all I have, that's all I know, so thank you very much.